Okay, well, first, we just want to thank you and the Los Santos Police Department for taking time out of your day to meet with us. We would also like to thank of Police Alex Donnelly for attending as we get answers that have been provided to us by the public. Actually, I haven't seen him. Is he here?
Yeah, I spoke to the chief. I'm unsure if you received the email. He essentially said that I'll be taking care of it. This is the responsibility of the Media Relations Division, so any questions that you have, I will be providing answers to, which he could in his capacity as a staff officer.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll just get started.
Absolutely.
Our first two questions were brought up last minute, so I apologize that they weren't included in the email, but they seem pretty
Okay.
straightforward. If you can't answer them, we understand. First one is at Weazel News, we often communicate on our radios while we're driving. Is it illegal to use your radio while you're operating a vehicle?
Obviously, I think this boils down to the penal code as it is defined as. I think you're referring to distracted, drunk, or impaired driving. Obviously, using anything similar to your phone or your radio up to the level where it hinders the way you move in traffic is considered a misdemeanor. So, in terms of using your radio while driving, obviously there are different devices that are used around the city. I'm not sure which radios in particular you're speaking of. I suppose the push-to-talk ones.
Yes, that's correct.
But as I said, if it affects your movement in traffic up to the level where you are endangering someone else, it is considerable a misdemeanor offense. Obviously, the Los Santos Police Department, as you know, we utilize radios as well. But obviously, in terms of professional use, there are, I can't say some misconceptions, but we do look at those instances at case by case basis, using context into contact as well.
All right, perfect. Thank you for your clarification on that. In Los Santos, there's a really high rate where people just continue to commit crime after crime after they've been arrested. Is the department working with these ex criminals to give them mentorship and help build up their career so they don't continue to fall in this path?
In terms of, as you said, mentorship, I think the Sheriff's Department Detention and Parole Bureau essentially, answers that question as a whole. What that bureau is for, wholeheartedly, is to give a convict a second chance right away. So they put the inmates on parole. They allow them outside the prison, serving minimal time with essentially an agreement between themselves to allow, obviously, as you said, not commit any more crimes for the parole not to be suspended. In terms of the Los Santos Police Department and our stance, the Community Relations Unit is essentially pretty much answers that question as well. We as a whole bring citizens regardless of their background. We assist them in any essentially walk of life, as you said. So if they do seek any assistance, they can always refer to our department and the Community Relations Unit in specific, should they seek any guidance or assistance on that matter.
Great, perfect. Thank you. Our next question, this starts where we have emailed you the content. After hearing from various sources, you have new high-speed pursuit bikes available for all PO3 officers. This seems like a very extreme safety risk. Are there guidelines or standards that officers operating motorcycle units are held to that are different from a traditional vehicle?
Absolutely, you are correct in terms of us having safety measures we do have. When I speak for the police department, in particular the Los Santos Police Department, I'm not sure how it is with the sheriffs. The Advanced Training Division, who conducts these certifications and trainings, has a two-part training guide, which essentially consists of a theoretical and practical part. And the theoretical part are included of all the safety guidelines. And then the practical part is where the officers actually tested if they can handle, maneuver, and drive the bike properly while using those safety requirements and protocol that follows it.
Okay, perfect. There have also been many concerns regarding the use of personal vehicles being used by your department while on. What is the reason behind this, and what are the protocols regarding the use of officers' personal vehicles?
In terms of personal vehicles, I am not met with any guidelines. This is more so referring to the Detective Bureau. The Detective Bureau has options to use civilian-like vehicles for undercover operations, for surveillance, reconnaissance. In terms of personal vehicles, I think you might be referring to the undercover fleet of vehicles, which are often used in operations with the robbery and homicide unit, with the vice unit, and the gangs and narcotics division.
Okay, and moving on to our next question, why are the disciplinary suspensions of officers so lacking? Citizens have their driver's license suspended and receive jail time for using a radio while driving for longer than the amount of time that an officer receives a suspension for misusing their firearm. For example, Chris Spector,
Yes, they are.
PO2, was suspended for 2 days on October 14th, 2021 for excessive use of force. Shay Hudson, PO3, suspended for 1 day on September 30th, 2021 for excessive use of force and the improper deployment of a Remington shotgun towards an unarmed civilian. And then example 3, Suki Kingstone, Police Detective 1, was suspended for 1 day on December 13th, 2021, according to the public notice issued by Lieutenant Kalana for creating a safety hazard. Do you think these punishments are appropriate in comparison to those issued to civilians by these very officers for charges that are arguably less than those issues listed above?
Very good question. In terms of disciplinary actions, I think we have to also account with what I said previously, that context is very important. Some of these cases that you've mentioned, I can only imagine are ran by internal affairs or even a handling supervisor whose obviously authority is limited in ways of issuing disciplinary actions. Every single supervisor, ranked from Sergeant 1 through the Chief of Police, have a set authority when it comes to issuing disciplinary actions. I think the suspensions you mentioned in particular, obviously we can look into them and give you more details on the subjects once we run it by internal affairs. But in terms of these cases, I think context is very important. I think just going by the reasoning can be somewhat deceiving. As you said, license suspensions and suspensions given to officers, there's a very big line between internal punishments and in-field repercussions that come from committing a crime. So in terms of context, I think that's very important, which we're not looking at right now because we don't have the full picture when we mention these suspensions that you mentioned now.
This wasn't on my list to ask, but in terms of context, let's say if I pulled out a shotgun and aimed it at an unarmed civilian, I would obviously get far more repercussions than these officers mentioned. But they don't face the same repercussions for breaking protocol. They just get a slap on the wrist for a day or two and then they're back out on the street.
And as you said, I mean, I won't be agreeing with that or disagreeing. As I said, the issue precedes essentially the suspension. I think when we look at suspensions and punishments, as I said, context is very important. This is an officer of the law. The officer of the law is responding to a call that might be dangerous, that might involve gang members. Obviously, when these issues arise, we do take the context into consideration, but we do not lay off the punishments. A suspension is essentially the highest punishment you can get before termination. The length of a suspension can vary. Suspensions can be followed by disciplinary tasks. They can be followed by wage garnishments depending on what the issue is at hand. So I think that's something you got to take into consideration that these are police officers and the context of the situation itself.
Since we kind of started talking about IA reports, I'm going to go out of order here for a second. There have been comments made by LSPD members who wish to remain anonymous that internally the IA department is a joke among the LSPD and its members. How can you reassure the public that this department is in fact working to investigate reports of misconduct fairly and accurately?
Right, so statistically, obviously, what our department does for the sake of transparency, just in these cases, is we publish the monthly bulletin. The monthly bulletin includes internal affairs statistics, statistics that are collected over the course of the month, in this case the year, which we've done in late December. I'll go over some of the statistics with you. The Internal Affairs Group of the Los Santos Police Department the last year received 317 employee complaints, 94 of which were marked as sustained upon completion, which essentially means the reported employee committed all or part of the allegations of misconduct and poor service. 41 were marked as not resolved and dismissed, meaning they were dismissed following a lack of information or evidence to continue the investigation. 82 complaints were marked as exonerated, indicating the investigation had shown the alleged acts did occur, but they were fully justified, lawful, and proper. 14 complaints were withdrawn, meaning the complainants withdrew their report. One complaint was marked as insufficient evidence to adjudicate, meaning the complaint was closed due to lack of evidence. 13 were marked as actions could be different, which essentially says the investigation had showed the alleged acts did occur and were justified and legal, but the employee could have performed to a higher standard. So what that essentially tells us, we just mentioned, from 317 complaints, only 112 were ruled in the favor of the reported employee, meaning the rest were either dismissed or were put up against the employee as they did commit either all or parts of the allegations of misconduct and poor service. So in terms of numbers, I think the Internal Affairs Group handles these complaints very well. There is no, I think, jokes in the Los Santos Police Department. I think if anyone feels that way, they could obviously bring it up to the commissioners to investigate, but I can reassure you the Internal Affairs Group is doing a great job in rooting out issues among police officers.
If that's true, then why do officers such as Detective Supervisor Grace Steele treat IA reports as a joke and refuse to give her badge number when requested?
As I said, going back to the previous topics that we mentioned, if that had occurred, I can only refer you to the Internal Affairs Group so we can resolve the issue.
Yeah, our employee Chad was
Hi.
arrested by Grace Steele earlier this week for obstruction of justice when he asked for her badge number. How are citizens supposed to file complaints to the IA department when time and time again officers such as Grace break the protocol by not providing badge numbers and then never being disciplined for these numerous breaches of policy? How are we supposed to file IA reports if we don't even have their badge numbers, which they're required to give us?
As you mentioned, this is an ongoing investigation. If these alleged acts do occur, the best course of action is to go through internal affairs.
How are
You
we
do not
supposed to go
receive,
through internal affairs if we don't have a badge number?
if you are having issues receiving badge numbers from our employees, which should not be an issue, there is a policy at hand that if a citizen requests your badge number, you're obligated to give it.
What
There are
happens when they don't
absolutely,
give it to us? Because this
there
happens
are
time and time again.
absolutely, there are other ways to go about this. Coming by the station, for once, in terms of you seem to know the officer's name. If they fail to give you their badge number, you can stop by the station. You
I
can
did come by
file
the
a,
station, and I was told I couldn't get any information because Grace outranked the officer supervisor that I was speaking to. So I'm sure you can understand our frustration with this. There is no way we can move forward when we can't get information because it's either we're not getting their badge number or they're too high ranking.
as I said, this shouldn't be an issue. I think, obviously, I'm not met with the situation or the context. I suppose you now have do have the badge number, which obviously you can file a complaint with. As I said, I'm not met with the situation in terms of the charge or what happened at the pier or whatever situation you mentioned. As I said, there are different ways to go about obtaining a badge number. You can reach out to Internal Affairs directly. You don't have to file a complaint. You can file a request saying that this officer or this individual was involved in a alleged breach of protocol. And to answer the reporter's question at the front, if you do not know their name, you can go based off their rank or physical description. Detectives commonly wear plain clothes. It's a detective. It's female. She has short hair. Her skin is light. She was wearing this clothing at the time of the incident. She was with these officers that you might know, so that's gonna help us narrow down essentially the search if there is one for an employee that refuses to give their badge number.
Okay, well, our next question is about Gary Taylor. He was terminated after being a great officer for nearly 2 years, leading the Metro Division for a significant period of time and demonstrating his commitment not only to the department but also the public. Why was action taken against him due to a disgruntled colleague leading to his termination, which was ultimately an error of paperwork on the LSPD's side?
On this situation in particular, I believe you're met with the notice that we put on the notice board regarding his termination. What this essentially is that after an internal affairs investigation that was filed, Gary Taylor has been terminated because he deceived recruitment staff and did not uh, subject his previous criminal history upon employment. So the only thing that matters now is that that issue has been resolved and the way recruitment screenings are handled have been only improved.
Has any action been taken against Officer Tavares for misusing government, although public information for personal gain?
As I said, in terms of these, I can't say allegations, but issues with employees breaching protocol, there is a better way to go about this. As I said, refer to the internal affairs with any evidence you may have. Obviously, I'm not met with anything. I'm not sure the context. I cannot comment on anything as of right now in terms of what you just mentioned.
How can the public be reassured that their records are not being accessed without any valid reason on a regular basis if your officers are willing to do this to their own colleagues?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course. How can the public be reassured that their records are not being accessed without any valid reason on a regular basis if your officers, such as Tavares, are willing to do this to their own colleagues?
Are you referring to the previous topic that you mentioned regarding the termination of Taylor?
His termination or any other context that this might come up?
As I said, I think taking things out of context is where the issue begins. The officer noticed the discrepancy. He reported to Internal Affairs, who investigated the issue and found that the employee at hand did have a criminal history and failed to report it. In terms of officers doing background checks or screening people for no reason, that's never been an issue. As far as I'm aware, it's never been reported. But we take this one situation in particular, where the officer noticed the discrepancy and then reported it to Internal Affairs to justify a, well, not justify, but to allegedly say that officers of the police or Los Santos Police Department are routinely working against protocol to check the records of civilians is absurd. I think we have to look at, as I said, the context of the situation. As far as I'm aware, we've never had officers or had issues with officers doing background checks on civilians or their employees without probable cause or reason. In terms of employees doing checks on other employees, that only refers to the Internal Affairs Group, who, as I said, resolved the issue and handled the termination of Gary Taylor.
Going forward, how is the going to improve its background check and hiring process to ensure another situation like this cannot happen again? In this particular case, the LSPD and the city were lucky that Gary Taylor was a good man. However, this lack of thorough vetting of applicants could have led someone with bad intentions entering the department and having access to powerful weapons and information.
Yeah, I apologize. I heard another two questions. If I could get just one at a time, I don't know who would like to go first since I heard Ms. Double's question. Maybe we go over that first and then follow up on your questions
Uh,
in
going
the front row.
Going forward, how is the LSPD going to improve its background check and hiring process to ensure that a situation like this can't happen again?
As I said, the details regarding this topic are very finite. In terms of improving background checks, I spoke to that internal affairs group. The only thing that we can say right now is that the issue has been resolved, and information obtained from the investigation are going to aid in future screenings to make sure felons do not bypass recruitment screenings following that incident, obviously.
Okay, next question is where are the funds gathered to settle court cases outside of trial? And will this information be public as it is public funds used to settle these court cases?
In terms of public funds, anything regarding budgets and taxes, I'm afraid you'll have to refer to the commissioners of the government. They're the ones that allocate the budget for the Los Santos Police Department, and whatever the budget may be for the question at hand, I think it's best to bring it up with them and they can disclose any information
So this information
timely.
is not public where anyone can go view how the taxpayer money is allocated within the LSPD.
Can you repeat the question again?
So there's nowhere that the public can go to view the LSPD's budget and see how taxpayer money is allocated without contacting the commissioners. correct?
Essentially, the budget is handled by the government. I'm not sure if it's directly the commissioners or if they have an entire chamber for this. As I said, if you have any concerns regarding the budget or would like to have this public or would like to see where tax money goes, you can always refer to the commissioners as they are the ones allocating budgets for not only us, but for Weazel, for the Sheriff's Department, for the Department of Corrections, and so on.
Can we just get confirmation that the IA department within the LSPD is not external? It's actually a division in the department itself.
So Internal Affairs Group is officially a division. It was rebranded in a way that it was renamed to the Internal Affairs Group, and it strictly operates under the Office of the Chief of Police to remain unbiased. So what this means, uh, any supervisor, any command officer, even any staff officer, should obviously the issue arise, which can be brought to the commissioners. They review these incidents, if there are any, and allegations very unbiasedly.
Can you agree, though, that even though it's supposed to be unbiased, it would be hard to be unbiased when you're judging a colleague? You know, I can say I'm unbiased all day long, but if I look at something from ASBO, obviously we're colleagues. I'm going to lean towards his favor.
Are
Well,
you
maybe
saying
not ASBO.
that? Are you saying that the Internal Affairs Group is likely to lean towards the employee side, or
Oh, absolutely, of course.
obviously in these circumstances? I mean, from my personal experience, uh, as you said, the Internal Affairs Group is comprised of investigators who are unbiased. Their whole job is to be unbiased and review these cases and allegations of incidents in regard to protocol. So they do take protocol, they do take regulations, and they look at the uh, alleged acts that may have occurred from an unbiased point of view.
And then just one more question, too, before I let Emily take over.
All right.
We did pull up Officer Gary well, he's not officer anymore, of course, his application for when he applied at the police department. Nowhere on that application did it state for him to outline any history of criminal activity. Was there something internal that the public couldn't see from his application where that was supposed to be disclosed, or was that just never asked?
Obviously, as I said, in terms of the investigation has been finalized. Everything that the Internal Affairs Group needed to know about that specific incident knows. The incident has been resolved. As you know, Gary Taylor has been terminated, and any mistakes made have been reflected in future screenings to make sure that felons do not bypass our security standards ever again.
Okay, Emily, I think that's all that I had. You can take over whenever you're ready.
I just noticed the chief behind me. That's scary. Aspo, you can go first.
Well, hello.
I just had a question. Are officers allowed to look up civilians' record willy-nilly if they feel like it?
Absolutely not. As you said, willy-nilly is not the terminology
Then why
that I would
has
use.
Tavares not been reprimanded for looking up Gary Taylor's record?
As I said, if there are any instances where an officer allegedly breached protocol, there is reason that he breached protocol. Referring to the Internal Affairs Group is the best course of action. They can investigate that incident fully. As I said, I'm not contextually met with the situation, but the best way to go about it is to forward it to Internal Affairs for them to investigate.
I'm sorry for bombarding you with all these Gary Taylor questions, but you, of course, is the media relations who we bring these questions to.
Right.
So.
That's completely fine. No worries. Is there anything else?
Yeah, you look good today.
Thank you very much. The sir in the back over there.
Yeah, just a quick one. Earlier on, you said that your officers don't conduct random background checks on civilians unless they have due cause. But obviously, in this situation, we've seen and we've got evidence and proof that it does indeed occur. You said obviously if we're aware of it, we should file an A report, which is understandable. The question is, how would we even know that this is occurring? How do I know that there's someone, in the back in the bullpen behind us couldn't be doing a background check on me right now? I've got no idea. And obviously that trust in the department publicly has somewhat been lost because of this incident.
As you've mentioned, if you have evidence against an officer in particular, going to Internal Affairs is the best course of action. In terms of officers doing random background checks, our protocols are very strict. Namely, obviously, probable cause and collecting evidence goes in hand with doing background checks, but in terms of officers randomly doing background checks, that's, you know, in a way it is a false claim until obviously the evidence that you have has been sent to internal affairs for them to adjudicate and actually make the call.
In Scranton v. LSPD and Coonham v. LSPD, a common theme that has shown up is the Detectives Bureau maintains files that they refer to as a DB case file on an individual. But these files can then be used to detain someone where otherwise probable cause would not exist, and where probable cause to search someone would not exist. These files have then been subpoenaed by the courts multiple times, but so far, according to the court system, the LSPD has refused to release those files at any point during the trial, not even to the judges overseeing the cases. Does the LSPD intend to allow the judges overseeing this case to review the files, or are they withholding that? That's the first question.
Obviously, I'm not going to provide any comments on any specific cases, as I mentioned in the start of the meeting. Context obviously is very important. I'm not met with this case. The judicial branch is going to do everything they can to obviously resolve the court case, and the Los Santos Police Department will assist with it. However, the judges deem it appropriate. In terms of DB case files, I spoke to one of the detectives. Essentially, by the name of a case file, it is pretty self-explanatory. They are files where detectives conduct advanced reconnaissance and surveillance based on evidence they previously received to obviously prove crimes and to enforce essentially advanced policing on either organized crime groups or instances of individuals committing crime, similar to fraud, maybe tax evasion, murder even, and tying individuals to affiliated gangs. That's obviously one of the jobs of a DB case file.
We're just glad to hear that DB case files actually exist, because that was a big question since they have never been turned over to a judge requesting them.
So the LSPD, if subpoenaed for them, would indeed follow through with that, or would they follow through with that subpoena if provided?
As I said, obviously this case in particular, I cannot provide any information. The Los Santos Police Department is obviously going to assist the judicial branch in resolving any issues at any point in time, so should it come to that, the Los Santos Police Department is going to evaluate and obviously consult the judicial branch to resolve the issue at hand.
As a follow-up to the main topic, with no other causes present to conduct a search or a detainment of an individual, do these case files in and of themselves then authorize a detective to detain and search someone purely on the basis that they exist?
Can you repeat the question? I don't quite understand.
So, if the case file exists on an individual, and there's
Right.
no other probable cause to detain, arrest, or search them, do the case files, in and of themselves, grant the officer grounds to search, detain, or otherwise interact with the individual in that such capacity?
Right, so Department Probable Cause does not precede the Detective Bureau. So what that essentially means that any evidence that a detective or detectives have collected in a case file, if they are sufficient evidence as deemed by department protocol, which is department-wide, if it deems a search necessary or with enough probable cause adjustable, or acceptable rather, there is no reason why the officer at hand would not be able to conduct a search. Obviously these, as I said, without any specifics, these case files are extensively worked on, collected by a number of detectives and detective support officers who worked essentially just around the clock to assist detectives in these cases to make sure that whatever the alleged crimes the individual might have committed, he is charged for and obviously brought to justice.
Alright, and then I guess, as a final follow-up to this segment of questions, effectively, the way the courts have presented this issue is that the LSPD has refused to release those files at any point during trial, and those cases are at risk of being tossed out because the LSPD refuses to release them. So how can we have confidence that those case files aren't being misused?
As I said, if there is an instance where you believe an officer misuse their powers, it always boils down to the internal affairs group. So if you think you have been wronged by an officer or detective, or a detective that might be misusing, as you said, this case file, which is highly unlikely, as I said, probable cause is department-wide and does not precede the detective bureau. So
So
any evidence,
who do we file an IA report against when the department is refusing to hand over evidence that has been subpoenaed by a judge?
are you referring to a specific court case or
No, I'm just referring to any of the court cases that have evidence requested that has gone
Yeah.
unanswered.
are
Yeah,
these ongoing court cases?
No, because they have been tossed out for lack of evidence because the LSPD refuses to hand it over once subpoenaed.
As I said, these court cases have specifics, they have details. Without any information additionally, I'm not able to comment on that. In addition to that, obviously the judicial branch, I'm not sure their authority and obviously their protocol, so that's something to either bring up to the commissioners because as of
mean,
right
we're
now, I
not
have no answer to that.
we're not asking about specific cases. We're asking the
Right.
general policy where LSPD has been completely uncooperative with the court systems.
In terms of, as I said, the judicial branch and their protocols, I'm not sure how they operate or how they request information. If you have any questions in regards to how the Los Santos Police Department operates with the judicial branch, I think referring to the commissioners is the best idea as they maintain that line of work between us.
At what point do you think not handing over subpoenaed evidence is obstruction of justice itself?
In which capacity? Are you referring to something specific or is
If a
there...
judge, no, just in general, if a judge subpoenas evidence from the LSPD and the LSPD does not provide that evidence, when do you think that is obstruction of justice itself?
As I previously mentioned, I'm not met with the protocols and the authority of the judicial branch. So in terms of evidence being confiscated for the use of a court case, I'm not familiar with that. Additionally, I can follow up on the questions, but as of right now, I think your best bet is the commissioner's office and the government, as they're the ones who obviously created the judicial branch, and as I said, maintain our relationship and line of work in terms of cooperation.
Used to chime in a bit here, but there's also something called a motion to suppress for exclusion of evidence from a trial. So it's not obstruction of justice in itself either.
I am well aware of the motion to suppress, respectfully, Chief, and I have not seen a case on the public docket where the LSPD has used that to suppress, unless it was done behind closed doors or whatever.
I was more so referencing to Mrs. Devil, as she was claiming it was obstruction of justice.
No, I
by
was just
not
wondering
putting forth the
when,
evidence.
if that was, it would become that.
Thank you, Peter.
I mean, that's dependent on a few factors.
Emily, I'm sorry, you can.
It's very hard to say right now.
I will
It
do a
would be
follow-up.
very specific cases.
I will see if I can't speak with the judicial branch on that matter as well to get clarification on their end.
All right, perfect.
Anyone have any questions on that topic? Any more follow-ups? Going once, twice. Sold.
Oh, we have one
There's-
more. We have one more.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Can you share your thoughts on the lack of a constitution in the state of San Andreas and how we are forced to rely on the penal code and a system of implied rights, which are often implied by officers themselves?
Can you just repeat the start of the question, just the very first few words?
Can you share your thoughts?
Obviously, as of right now, I speak on the behalf of the department. So my thoughts, personally, obviously, I won't be disclosing anything. And in terms of the department, I cannot speak on the behalf of the department right now. In terms of, you mentioned implied rights. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, but I think in terms of rights and the Constitution, that obviously is a concern. But I think it's best to bring it up with the government, as they're the ones that handle essentially legal issues in terms of the Constitution and, well, implied rights, as you mentioned.
Do
Can
you
you just clarify what you mean by implied rights?
So, being the one who consistently finds myself working on matters of the law when I'm reporting, a common thing that comes up from police officers to the judicial branch to even the commissioners the common trend is you're right, you have rights. Those rights are implied, but when you ask what they are implied by, their response is personal opinion. So there is no defined rights anywhere. You have obviously some department press releases that grant certain things. I know an individual has said that your rights the right to remain silent. It's widely dependent on personal preference and if department protocol defines it. If it doesn't define it, then it's up in the air. So that's you, there is no defined. It's implied by the individual who sees them at the time.
Right. Yeah, obviously, to keep it short, the Los Santos Police Department obviously operates by the state of San Andreas Penal Code. So, in terms of personal opinion, an officer is never going to arrest you if they personally think that you committed a crime. If the crime has been proven, if the crime is against the Penal Code of San Andreas, you'll obviously, be put under arrest. But in terms of rights, as you mentioned, in terms of a constitution and a more advanced docket or document or an actual, as you said, book of rights, that's, more so the issue of the government and the commissioners, as I think this is probably something that they would be concerned with. I'm not sure if you brought this up with them, but in terms of us operating, we operate by the Penal Code.
Do you agree then that as it stands, San Andreas and the cities within are currently governed as a police state?
As I said, in terms of rights in any constitution, if you have anything to bring up in terms of more advanced or more developed, I can't say a book of rights, but as Ms. Whitehorse said, the Los Santos Police Department does not operate on its own in an unlawful way that would affect the citizens in a negative way. I can reassure you that.
Thank you for your answers today.